Take the bus. We're buying your sister a Tesla, my dad said on the morning of my graduation. I walked out of the house holding nothing but a cheap bouquet I bought for myself. Hours later, standing alone in my cap and gown, the dean's voice echoed through the stadium, and now our youngest billionaire graduate. The crowd erupted in applause. My parents, watching from home, dropped their programs. They never saw me coming. They never believed in me. And in that moment, the boy they ignored became the man they could no longer control. I'm Gideon, and this is my story. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reached. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if you find even a piece of yourself in my story, please subscribe to this channel. It means more than you know to someone who spent years feeling invisible. Take the bus. We're buying your sister a Tesla, my dad said at 7:10 a.m. Coffee steaming between his hands like he needed something to hold while dropping the line. My mom didn't look up from her phone when she added, "You're used to buses anyway." I didn't argue. I pressed the invitation to commencement flat under my palm until the paper bit my skin, then slid it into my jacket like a secret I'd somehow stolen from a better version of me. In the entryway mirror, my gown hung straight, pressed within an inch of its life, the black fabric trying and failing to look celebratory in that house. At 7:40, I walked to the corner florist and bought a small bundle of white flowers wrapped in tissue, thin as napkins. Celebrating, the clerk asked. Trying, I said. Outside, Edmund smelled like damp cedar and salt. The sky hadn't decided whether to brighten or drizzle. I thought about asking to borrow the car again and didn't. Some habits keep you safe because they keep you small. By 8:05, I was at the Main Street bus stop with my suitcase balanced against my knee. I thumbed open Facebook, and there it was, a photo of Skylar leaning against a white Tesla beneath a strip of Pacific Northwest sky, my mom's caption stamped with pride and a sea of heart emojis. Not a word about the cap and gown folded in my bag, the name that would be read this afternoon. The comments were a chorus: "She shines. She deserves it all. So proud of your girl." I muted the family group chat and let the silence in. The bus pulled in and I took the back row, the seat with a window that showed me everything and let no one see me. As Edmund slipped past the tidy lawns, the two-story houses with blue trim, the beach where I'd learned to keep my voice under the wind, I cataloged images from the last 15 years, the way some people count sheep. Paper cups stained with espresso from the cafe where I learned the names of regulars by their orders. Library tables under fluorescent hum textbooks that smelled like dust and glue. Lines of code on a black screen, blinking green cursor that felt like a heartbeat at 2 a.m. The email that had tilted the world partial scholarship from UC Berkeley. Another, "I'm not ready for a message from Professor Thorne inviting me to speak on financial resilience." I slid that one into a folder I named later and closed it. I wasn't opening anything today unless it opened itself. Hours unspooled into the rhythm of road and engine. The bus rocked me south. I dozed and woke to hills, bridges, the color of water changing. I ran a mental inventory of what I carried, the bouquet like proof of a promise to congratulate myself, a program schedule, a one-way ticket out of a story I'd outgrown. Berkeley at 1:00 p.m. was all green canopy and gold banners, a campus so alive it felt like it might lift me. Section B, row 12. Ava texted a link to a map that I didn't need because I'd memorized this place, its shortcuts, its shade. "We have extra water," Finn added, as if there were any detail about me they hadn't already noticed, and quietly covered. I wrote back, "On my way." Backstage at 1:20, a student worker handed me a program and said there would be a special announcement for an outstanding graduate. She said it like a weather report. I heard it like a thunderhead. I nodded and kept moving, breathing through the hallway's echo, feeling the press of 1,000 futures on the other side of the doors. By 1:50, I slid into my seat. I set my white flowers on the chair beside me, the way you save a place for someone who might yet arrive. The other chair stayed empty, a hollow that felt honest. Cameras swept the stands, a giant screen magnifying strangers' pride. For half a second, the live feed caught my face. I looked calm in pixels, jaw set, shoulders squared, but inside there was the old argument between want and rule. Want to be seen. Rule, don't ask for it. I traced the raised letters of my name on the program and let the noise fold around me. Outside, wind worried the flags. Far away, a phone buzzed. Mine. I didn't check it. The dean stepped to the podium, the crowd rippled, and the day tilted toward whatever was next. In my head, I asked the only question that mattered: if I get called for something bigger than any of us imagined, do I stop being the family's shadow, or do I just cast a longer one? The summer Skylar turned 8, our yard turned into a unicorn rink. There was a rented pony with a braided mane, glitter confetti that stuck to the soles of my sneakers for days, a cake stacked like a wedding and covered in pink shimmer. I stood at the edge and refilled lemonade. The next week, we were still fishing plastic stars out of the hedges. When my birthday rolled around, Dad picked up a store cake on his way home from an HVAC call and set it on the kitchen table between a pile of bills and a ring light Skylar's followers would later adore. "Make a wish," Mom said, distracted by her phone. I wished for a door to open and for the courage to walk through it alone if I had to. My room was the smallest one, the paint a gentle blue that looked gray when the Puget Sound clouds pressed close. Across the hall, Skylar's room was a candy shop, hurricane unicorn bedding posters, the ring light on a tripod casting her in permanent afternoon. I learned early that light in our house could be owned. Some of us grew in its spill. Some of us learned to see in the dark. The first trophy I won was for math state level, the kind of thing you bring home in both hands because it feels heavier than it looks. I carried it through the front door, expecting a pause in the everyday. Mom glanced up, smiled a neat, polite smile, and said, "That's great, can you unload the dishwasher?" Dad clapped my shoulder and told me to give my sister her moment. Her latest video had cracked 200 likes. I set the trophy on the shelf where we kept cookbooks no one opened and watched dust start to claim it. That's the thing about silence, it settles. When Edmonds pressed on me like a lid, I went to the beach. In the wind, no one cared if you were gifted or forgettable. Ferries moaned across the water like they were leaving for a place that didn't ask you to audition. I memorized the schedule like scripture imagined a future measured not in views but in exits. Mr. Donovan found me after class in 7th grade, long after the bell, when the hallway smelled like floor cleaner and rain gear. He pointed at a problem that wrapped itself around the edge of the page, then handed me another sheet. "You don't belong here," he said, pausing while my stomach sank in the best way possible. He talked about a math summer program and scholarships and letters he'd write if I wanted him to. He was the first adult whose eyes didn't slide off me. I pulled the flyer from the hallway corkboard, folded it twice, and tucked it into my notebook like contraband. At home, I filled out the form in my neatest handwriting, checked the boxes that asked for dreams. I slid it into the family computer to email because we had one account for everything. The cursor blinked. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred. Weeks later, I was on the family desktop looking for a picture Mom wanted and opened the sent folder by accident. The email subject line was my name and the program title. The reply Mom had written on my behalf was short, polite, final: "Regretfully, Gideon won't be able to attend. Family obligations. Financial priorities. Thank you for the opportunity." My breath went thin. I scrolled again to be sure. It was there in black and white: my first door closed by someone who preferred me home holding the ladder while they changed the bulb over my sister's stage. I never asked her about it. Some conversations don't reopen anything, they only make the lock louder. After that, I learned the house rules without anyone writing them down. Achievements were nice, as long as they didn't require attention that might be spent on Skylar's shine. Praise was a finite resource. It went where the ring light pointed. I put my trophy in a box in the closet so I wouldn't have to watch the dust. I swapped wanting for discipline flashcards, timed drills, a marathon runner's mind for the long flat parts. When the world got loud, holidays, relatives, televised games where my father cheered for men who would never know his name, I did the dishes and listened. Adults say things to each other they'd never say to you, things like, "We're doing our best, and she just has that spark, and boys don't need as much." Those sentences wrote themselves into me like laws I would later have to break. One evening after a storm, the power went out. We lit candles and told a version of ourselves that worked in the dark. Skylar was bored without her ring light. I was not. I took a cheap flashlight and read the back of a finance book I'd found in the discount bin, learning how money moves and why. I understood then that if I wanted light that couldn't be switched off by someone else, I'd have to build the power source myself. Before 8th grade ended, Mr. Donovan pressed a sealed envelope into my hand, his recommendation for whatever door I could find next. "Mail it yourself," he said, as if he knew the house politics I didn't have the language for yet. I promised I would. I kept every paper that had my name on it after that. I learned to send things from the library, to keep copies, to trust a tracking number more than a promise. If you looked at our family photos from those years, you'd see a bright child in front of a tripod and a boy at the edge holding a plate. You wouldn't see the sent folder, the form letter wearing my name like a costume, the way a dream closes without even making a sound. That's the trick. That's how invisibility works. One person answers for you and the world believes it's your voice. I didn't yet have words like boundary or emotional labor. I had a beach and a bus schedule and a mind that kept lists. On the night I packed for high school, I wrote a sentence on a scrap of paper and hid it in the pocket of my jacket. When there's no light left in the room, learn the circuitry. Years later, I would find that paper and recognize my own handwriting, like meeting a friend I'd left behind. So when a different email arrived, the one from Berkeley years after, and I saw my name typed to the left of possibility, I printed it before anyone could touch a keyboard. I folded it into my wallet and walked to the beach. The ferries were moving. The wind was up, and somewhere a child's party sparkled without me. I didn't mind. I'd saved a seat in a future where I could finally see. And yet a question stuck under my tongue like a sliver: if someone can answer an email for you, what else can they sign your name to, and who in the end gets to author the life you live? I learned people by their orders before I learned they wouldn't learn me at all. 6 a.m. at the Edmonds Cafe, I could pull a double espresso by feel and have Mrs. Chen's drip ready before she cleared her throat. I kept a mason jar behind the register with a strip of masking tape that said college in block letters. Every tip, every quarter under a napkin, every stray dollar from the busboy shift went into that jar. The manager laughed that I tracked pennies like a banker. I told him it was easier to count money than permission. After school, I'd clock a second shift or sweep the patio while rain misted off the sound. My sneakers stayed damp for entire seasons. I'd empty the jar on Sundays at the kitchen table and roll coins while my dad watched the Seahawks and shouted at men on a field 2 states away. When the score tightened, he'd say, "Reliable wins games," and nod at my jar like reliability was a tax. At night, the house thinned out. I'd press my back into the sofa that slumped in the middle like a held breath and read used paperbacks on money in the glow of a crooked floor lamp. I dog-eared pages with overdue notices and utility bills. My mom would pass through, stack my marked bills on top of unopened mail and say, "You're too serious. Try smiling more." I didn't argue. I tucked the corner of a chapter about compound interest and thought about how seriousness pays in a language smiles can't translate. Game nights were good for disappearing. The living room swelled with commentary and chips. I sat on the carpet behind the couch with my laptop propped on a textbook and opened a window no one could see. UC Berkeley's admissions portal glowed like a door cracked in a dark hallway. I filled in fields 1 box at a time, spelling my name, carefully checking dates like they could break. I saved drafts to a thumb drive and kept it on a shoelace around my neck. When I got up to refill a bowl, the announcer yelled about a comeback and my father whooped like belief was something the TV could hear. Mr. Donovan handed me a sealed envelope outside the math room, the hallway empty except for the smell of bleach and the echo of something I might one day call grace. "For whatever comes next," he said, tapping the flap, "and mail it yourself." I slid it into my backpack and didn't take it out except to make sure it was still there. I liked the way the weight of it shifted the bag against my shoulder, a reminder that there was at least one adult rooting for the version of me that didn't apologize for wanting more. My jar grew, then shrank in ways I couldn't control. The water heater failed 1 week and the car needed tires the next. My mom would lift the lid and say, "We'll put it back," like the jar was a neighbor we could pay and gossip. The night she registered Skylar for her first creator course, the receipt sat under the magnet, with a smiley face, and a note in my mother's hand read, "Borrowed from college. Will replace soon." Soon never learned our address. I stopped counting out loud. I still added every coin, but I did it in the quiet hours when no one mistook my saving for selfishness. The application wouldn't stop asking questions I'd never been invited to answer. What do you want to study? Why this school? Describe a challenge. I wrote about early mornings and dishwater hands, about library corners that made me feel less breakable, about the way numbers made promises people didn't. I deleted a sentence about family and replaced it with a line about fairies. I included Mr. Donovan's letter and checked the box that said I would submit additional materials electronically. At 12:15 a.m. on a wind-bitten night in November, with the TV finally muted and the house asleep, I sat on the floor and pressed submit. The click was a sound so small it could have been nothing. My heart didn't agree. It pounded against my ribs like it was trying to be heard through drywall. I watched the page spin until the confirmation appeared. I printed it at the library the next morning so I could hold proof in my hands, ink warm from the machine. Every shift at the cafe after that felt like a layover. I learned to count down problem sets in my head while steaming milk to memorize page numbers and release valves. When a customer told me I looked tired, I nodded like he'd given me a useful forecast. I stopped asking to borrow the car. I stopped explaining why I needed quiet after 10. I made an agreement with myself that had no witnesses. The first chance I got, I'd leave, and I wouldn't ask anyone to clap. One afternoon, I found my jar empty and a bright new ring light in the hall. The note this time didn't promise a return date. It just said, "This is for your sister's future," signed like a bill. That night, I rerouted the future in my head. Instead of waiting for approval, I would master consequence. Instead of asking for help, I would price it. I took the envelope from Mr. Donovan out of my bag, looked at the tidy script of my name, and slid it back. Some things you protect by leaving them unopened until you're free to use them. On the last Sunday before notifications, my dad flipped the channel during a commercial and told me I was dependable. "That's why we lean on you," he said, as if my shoulders were public infrastructure. I nodded and thought about bridges and weight limits and signs that say, "Closed for repair." Later, in the quiet of my room, I added another line to the list I kept under my mattress. Don't confuse being needed with being valued. When the email finally came, I read it twice before the words made any sense. I didn't run into the living room. I didn't text the family chat. I printed the message, folded it into my wallet, and walked down to the water. The ferries were moving. The wind was up. I stood there and let the cold find my ears, my knuckles, the place between my ribs where I kept the parts of me no one had bothered to ask about. If the money I saved could be borrowed without my consent, what happens when I own something that can't be borrowed at all? The dorm smelled like damp wood and freshman courage. The fan clicked on the ceiling like a metronome set just a hair too fast. Ava handed me a chipped mug and said the coffee wasn't good, but it was honest. Finn took the heavier end of my suitcase and backed through the door like a practiced mover. "You're family now," Ava said in the tone of someone who knew what the word cost and said it anyway. For the first time in a long time, the room I entered didn't require me to be smaller to fit. By day, I made sandwiches at Gracie's, learned how to smile with my eyes when a rush hit, how to stretch one loaf into two if deliveries came late. I wrote the words "due" for books on a sticky note and stuck it to my phone case. Tips went into a jar that lived under my bed in a shoebox labeled with a brand I couldn't afford. I tracked every shift on a folded printout of the schedule. $20 to clear the book fee I wrote in the margin, a private ledger that made the week feel winnable. At night, the library became a second address. We took the same table whenever we could, the one by an outlet that sparked if you hit it wrong. Ava sketched screens beside me while Finn read about bones that broke in too many places. I wrote functions until the cursor felt like it breathed with me. Somewhere between page turns and caffeine, we made a promise that had no ceremony. We were going to graduate. We would do it even if the numbers didn't add up and the hours did. My phone rang when the water heater at home failed again. 300, my mom said, skipping hello. They won't come out until we put down the deposit. I stared at the balance in my banking app, at the deposit from Gracie's, at the math that never forgave. "I don't have it," I said, and even I was startled by how steady my voice sounded. "So you've forgotten where you come from," she said, and hung up before I could explain that remembering and subsidizing are not the same verb. 5 minutes later, Skylar lit up my screen, the camera angled to show new shoes in a box, the color of a tax bracket I hadn't met yet. "Aren't they perfect?" she said, then added, "Mom says you're covering my tuition balance because I need to focus on content." Behind her, the ring light burned a neat halo on the wall. In the tiny rectangle, I could see my own face shrink. I told her I had to get to work and close the call before I said something I couldn't pack back into silence. We built a little life out of small rituals that paid in dignity. Ava taped grocery lists to the fridge and drew stars next to sale items. Finn left notes on the whiteboard to remind us to sleep. I wrote code that started as a budget calculator for students like us and became something with a name we joked about until it stuck. Budget App V1. I typed into the folder title, and when I hit save, the sound it made in my head was a door unlocking from the inside. On weekends, we bought noodles and told the truth. Ava said she'd chosen design because she wanted to make screens kinder. Finn said he wanted to be the kind of doctor who looked you in the eye before he wrote anything down. I said I wanted to build a life that no one could sign for me. They nodded like that was a reasonable major. The room felt like a place where ambition wasn't an insult. I went home for a short break because the bus was cheap and I still believed in holidays. Edmonds had the same gray sky, the same careful lawns. In the kitchen, my jar from the cafe years sat on the counter like a prop from an old play. I lifted the lid. It was empty enough to echo. Under a magnet on the fridge, a bill for a creator course was stamped unpaid, and across the bottom, my mother's handwriting cut a line that read, "Gideon cover." The certainty of it hit me harder than any request. It wasn't a question. It was a sentence. I put the lid back and stood there until the hum of the refrigerator sounded like static. Back at Berkeley, the dorm felt brighter for being borrowed. I worked the opening shift at Gracie's, pocketed 3 ones and a handful of coins, and wrote down another subtraction on my phone case. In the library that night, Ava slid a granola bar into my elbow crease without looking up, like we'd rehearsed generosity. Finn laughed at something on a page and said, "We're going to make it," as if he'd seen a future scan. I opened Budget App on V1 and built a feature that rounded up purchases and tucked the extra into a savings bucket. It felt like teaching the app to believe in the jar I never got to keep. The next call home came during finals. "We need to talk about contributing." My dad said, his voice the worn edge of a tool. "You're dependable. That's why we count on you." I stared at the calculus I'd been doing on my whiteboard, the equations that balanced because I had written them too. I thought about the difference between being counted on and being counted. I said I had to study and ended the call first. I leaned my head against the cinder block wall and let the cool take the heat out of my face. That night, the 3 of us sat on the dorm floor with a single frozen pizza and made a pact we didn't name. Ava said, "Whatever we build, we keep each other's names on it." Finn said, "And we don't let anyone spend what they didn't earn." I said, "Deal," and felt the word land like a signature I wanted to sign. I backed up the project to 2 drives and emailed a copy to myself. On my desktop, the file name glowed plain as a label and as loud as a promise. I didn't stop answering calls from home, but I started answering differently. I asked for line items. I said no when the math refused. In the space that opened, the app grew. We tested with students who didn't talk about vacations, who lined up at the bursar 5 minutes before closing. They sent notes that said, "This made rent possible," or "I finally see where the money goes." Those messages felt like light you don't have to plug in. One night I stood at the window of the library and watched the campus lights map out a city that had chosen to root for strangers. I thought about the jar, the ring light, the scent folder, the shoes in a screen. I touched the folder name with my fingertip and felt for the first time something steadier than defiance. If a tool I wrote could help people escape the drain, maybe it could help me step out of the current I'd been told was my duty. If an application could lift a student I'd never meet, maybe it could lift me out of the role of emergency contact who never gets to hang up. If a program could teach anyone to keep what they earn, maybe I could learn it too. And if something I built could not be borrowed without my permission, then maybe finally neither could I. The office smelled like dry erase markers and ambition. Equations filled the whiteboard in loops and arrows, but Professor Thorne didn't look at them when he spoke. He looked at me, fingers steepled, voice steady. "This isn't just a class project, Gideon. This is a solution." His words cracked something inside me, something that had been sealed for years by dismissal and silence. For once, someone with authority saw what I saw, that numbers weren't just homework, they were lifelines if handled right. Back at the small apartment I shared with Ava and Finn, we worked until our wrists ached. Ava designed screens with colors that didn't shame you for being broke. Finn ran tests, poking holes, making sure every calculation came back honest. We named it Budget U, half as a joke, but the more we said it, the more it sounded like a flag we could march under. Nights smelled of noodles and overbrewed coffee, but the glow of code on my laptop gave off a kind of light no ring in my sister's room ever had. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was sweeping crumbs off the counter at Gracie's. The subject line was blunt. Congratulations. A seed fund of $100,000. I excused myself, walked into the alley, and let tears run while the dumpsters hummed with flies. Back in the dorm, I read it aloud to Ava and Finn, my voice shaking, their cheers echoing against cinder block walls. We ordered takeout with money. None of us had the receipt, like proof that for one night we could splurge on hope. Soon we were commuting into San Francisco, riding the BART train with a backpack full of printouts and a head full of drafts. The first office in Soma was nothing glamorous. 2 IKEA desks, fluorescent lights, a window with a view of a brick wall, but when I sat at that desk and opened my laptop, I felt taller than I had ever felt at home. Investors sent emails that made my stomach flip. Term sheets, valuation numbers, clauses that could shape a lifetime. Months later, after the longest meeting of my life, I signed the deal. The number attached to my name was so large it almost looked like fiction. Over $1 billion in valuation. I shook hands, smiled for a picture, and then excused myself to the restroom, where I locked the stall door and sat on the lid chest, heaving. I had built something real, something that mattered, and no one in Edmonds had the faintest idea. That night my phone rang. My mother's voice was cracked and pleading. They shut off the power, Gideon. We need money. Please send what you can. I held the phone against my ear, silent until the line went dead. Minutes later, a message buzzed. You've changed. I put the phone face down and stared at the ceiling. For once, I didn't reach for my wallet. The following week, an email from my father landed in my inbox. No greeting, no warmth. Just, you're still nothing but hired help. Skylar is the one who brings this family pride. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the $1 billion contract folded in my drawer. He had no idea. The irony cut deeper than the insult. I printed the email confirming the sale of the company and sealed it in a plain envelope. I placed it in the back of my dresser behind socks no one would touch. I didn't know when, but I knew one day it would serve as proof, not for them, but for me, that I had been right to believe in myself. Every day after that, the distance widened. The app grew. Employees were hired, new features rolled out, but back home the story never changed. I was invisible unless they needed cash. I let the calls go unanswered more often. I let silence speak for me. The secret of my success grew heavier with every day I carried it alone. I owned a company worth more than they could imagine, yet in their eyes I was still the boy who could be counted on but never counted. And that raised the question I couldn't put down: if the truth ever surfaced, would it destroy what little connection remained or finally set me free? The morning light in Edmonds cut across the kitchen table, catching on the steam from my father's mug. Take the bus, he said, the words falling like a hammer. We're buying your sister a Tesla, my mother added without looking up. You're used to buses anyway. Skylar clapped her hands, laughter ringing off the walls. Finally, my Tesla. I pressed my lips together and folded the program into my pocket. There was nothing left to say. At the corner shop, I bought a bundle of white flowers wrapped in thin paper. The cashier asked, "Big day?" I nodded. Something like that. On the bus ride south, the world blurred past the window. I pulled out my phone and saw the post, my mother glowing with pride, her caption praising Skylar's new car. Dozens of likes, endless comments. Not a word about Berkeley. Not a word about me. I muted the group chat and let the hum of the engine drown out whatever else they had to say. By the time I stepped onto campus, banners rippled in the breeze. Berkeley in gold and blue alive, with families in pressed clothes and cameras raised high. I walked alone to the rows of seats. Row B, section 12, Ava texted. We saved a spot. I glanced toward the stands and found the place they held for me, their smiles visible even at a distance. My own family's absence stretched wider than the empty chair beside me. Backstage, a student handed me a program. There's going to be a special announcement today, she said casually, like it was nothing. I tucked it into my folder and walked back to my seat, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. I placed the flowers on the chair next to me, saving a space no one would fill. The ceremony unfolded in waves, names called applause, swelling cameras flashing. I clapped for strangers, watched the crowd, felt the ache of an emptiness that no degree could patch. Then the dean stepped up to the microphone. The hall quieted, and now he said, his voice ringing across the green, "We recognize one of our youngest billionaire graduates, founder of Budget U, Gideon Hale." For a second, I didn't move. The name hung in the air, mine and not mine, the boy from Edmonds and the man no one there believed in. Then the crowd erupted. Applause thundered. Students stood. A roar of recognition rolled over me, and I rose to my feet, my chest tightening with a cocktail of pride and grief. On the live stream screen above, I saw Skylar's face flash, her phone slipping from her hands, the gleam of the Tesla still shining in the background. My pulse hammered as I bowed slightly, the flowers clutched in my hand. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring until it died. For the first time, I didn't answer. In the stands, Ava and Finn waved their hands full of another bouquet, one they'd smuggled in just for me. They pressed it into my grip as I stepped off the stage. "You earned every bit," Ava whispered. Finn clapped my back, grounding me in a way no blood relative ever had. Scanning the crowd, I caught sight of Professor Thorne. He gave the smallest nod, a smile tugging at his mouth. He knew everything but let me hold the story myself. The cheers dulled into a hum in my ears. Victory had never felt so hollow. I had dreamed of this moment of validation, of proof. And yet the empty chair beside me, the silence from home, shouted louder than the applause. As I looked down at the bouquets in my arms, one bought for myself, one given by friends, I realized what family truly meant. When my phone lit up again with their number, I turned it face down on my lap. If they were only calling to claim a share, they would have to reckon with a new kind of silence. And in that quiet, I asked myself the only question that mattered: if they demand a place in this success, will I finally tell them no? I walked off the lawn to the edge of the stadium where the noise thinned to wind and paper. My phone kept buzzing, a stubborn metronome for a song I didn't want to dance to. I set it face down on my lap and looked at the two bouquets, one I bought for myself, one pressed into my hands by friends who showed up. The chair beside me was still empty, in my head an outline that no longer needed filling. I sat there until the field crews started folding chairs. Then I went back to the apartment, laid the program on the table, and stood at the window while the evening slid gold across the bay. The calls stacked into voicemails, each one a different version of the same request. I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Simply Fund. I wrote the first rule by hand on a yellow pad so there could be no confusion later: I fund futures, not entitlement. Then I wired the first grant tuition books, a small cushion for groceries, to a student I'd never meet but already recognized. The phone lit again. I switched it to Do Not Disturb and slipped the sealed envelope with the contract into the back of a drawer. Evidence didn't need an audience. Out on the water, a ferry horned once low and certain, and I remembered the boy who used to time his breath to that sound because it meant there were ways out that didn't require permission. I texted Ava and Finn a photo of the view and a single sentence: "Let's build something kinder." A reply came back in seconds: "We already are." Night took the bridge one rib at a time. I wrote the opening line for the talk I'd been asked to give and left it on the screen. Walking alone isn't failure. It's the first step toward a life you own. I gathered the dried flowers into a glass and let them be what they were: proof of a day that didn't wait for anyone to clap. Before bed, I typed a message to the version of me standing at the bus stop with a cheap bouquet and a question he couldn't ask out loud: "You made it across. Keep going." I didn't answer the next call. I didn't rehearse my worth. I turned out the light, the room held steady around me, and for the first time the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a boundary with my name on it.